Hi, I'm Joan Quinn, and welcome to the Joan Quinn Profiles. Waiting to be profiled is director Paul Duran and artist Kim McCarty. Writer-director Paul Duran was born in Hollywood, but went away for 20 years. He returned to architecture school at UCLA, and as an elective, he took classes in Italian cinema. It seems that changed the course of your life, Paul.
Well, actually, what happened was I really loved the films, but I got a C in the class.
Ooh.
And that just didn't sit well with me, so I started taking more cinema classes and started getting A's, and just realized that having grown up in Orange County and getting fed basically a steady diet of like Disney films and things like that, that I just missed out on this entire world.
So you mean you went away from Hollywood to Orange County?
Yes.
Well, that wasn't very far, was it?
Well, it's a completely different world, though. I was living behind the orange curtain for all those years.
So then you came back to UCLA?
Well, I came to Berkeley first.
Oh.
And I saw a little film up there called Clockwork Orange, which sort of opened my eyes to cinema at that point, and then dropped out and tried to become a millionaire overnight as a salesman, and realized that wasn't going to fly.
I know you've done so many funny things. I'm going to talk about those afterwards.
Okay.
But one of the things that once you started working in film or being so interested in film, architecture went by the wayside, I guess.
Well, I mean, in terms of a career, yes. I still am interested in architecture.
Oh,
I think the disciplines of film and architecture are linked, because you're dealing with space and how people function in that space. And I think directors, Antonioni was a great architectural director, people that understand the space, the frame.
That's interesting, because Ferré, the Italian dress designer, was an architect, and his clothes are very architectural. I mean, I guess working with space in a certain way, just what you're talking about.
And structure and order, and how things move through, because film is basically you're moving through a story in a certain way, and it's not haphazard, or it shouldn't be haphazard, even if it feels haphazard sometimes.
Well, then architecture helped you, but I thought all the other things that you did, you were a camera assistant.
Yes.
And you worked at Cannon Films.
Cannon Films was basically like summer school. I mean, it was this amazing place where you had at the top Menachem Golan and Yoram Globus, who, you know, were sort of pre-Miramax, pre-Harvey Weinstein, not with the same kind of taste as those guys, but they were basically
they were shooters, weren't they?
Yeah. But they were, you know, they also didn't have a clue sometimes.
But you were doing what, trailers?
Trailers,
working?
and I was working with all these young people, and we were all in the same boat, and we'd work all day, you know, 12, 14 hours a day, and then we'd go out and party all night, and it was just a great experience, and we all sort of pulled each other up, and you know, we still...
So you were there for how long?
I was there on and off for about 2 or 3 years.
And then the company went?
I left before the company went. I don't think my leaving had anything to do with it.
Oh, please. The big star left.
But they, you know, I was there during the period where they were working with Konchalovsky and making some really
Those were great.
excellent movies, Barfly and films like that. And we really believed in the company at that point of time. And then they started, you know, giving Sylvester Stallone the biggest payday for some movie called Over the Top, which was an arm wrestling movie, and you realize that it'd gone to their heads. And,
so that was the thing. That was the cutting point.
The cutting point.
More
yes, yes.
You did commercials.
Art direction.
Art directing.
I worked in art direction, mostly in music videos, and that was just like getting muddy and just, you know, working art and getting out there and...
You were a tour guide. Where were you a tour guide?
I gave tours to the Hollywood stars' homes.
Oh, you did? Did you drive the bus or did you just talk?
I drove the bus and I talked at the same time, and it was really, you know, it was great because it was kind of a comedy act, because you were there to entertain. For 2 hours you had these captive audience and you had to entertain, and, you know, if it got slow at a certain period of time, you would just go, well, there's Clint Eastwood's house over there.
You make up anything?
And people go, whoa, you know, you just have to roll with it.
Well, did you ever want to act? If you were doing that kind of thing?
I did a little acting in college, did a little acting in high school. I have put myself into both of my films.
Oh, have you?
Well, accidentally, I'm in The Dog Walker. I'm actually and it's not a Hitchcockian reference, it's really had to do with attrition. Because basically everybody in the film
started leaving.
And no, everybody in the film stayed with us. But I put everybody in the film because we didn't have a budget for extras. So I just pulled people off the crew and said, can you do this, can you do that? Just, background parts. And I came to this one scene, which is actually the first scene of the movie, and I'd run out of people to pull in from. And so I said, okay, I'll do it. And I happened to be the first person you see other than the lead, Will Stewart, in the movie.
Oh, dear. And I love the movie, but I didn't know you, so I wouldn't have recognized you.
Well, it's a scene where the lead character, Will Stewart, is basically asking for money at a 7-Eleven. And he's a good-looking guy in a suit, and he's...
Oh, I love that scene. You do, the editing on that is so great. Cut, 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 and he's so dejected.
And he's basically got this whole story about his car breaking down and his wife being sick.
So funny.
And he asked me as I walk out for money, and I turn him down, but I look at that scene, and this was the third week of shooting, and I'd lost 20 pounds during the shooting of the film. And it looked like I should be the one asking him for money because I just looked completely emaciated and tired, and he looked great.
Only to you, but that was a good scene. Let's talk about The Dog Walker. I was going to talk about one of your first movies, Flesh Suitcase.
My first movie, yes.
Which hit all the festivals, I guess.
I hit a number of festivals. We were at the first Slam Dance, and we're in Seattle and Santa Barbara and Houston and Berlin and a number of other festivals.
Well, how low budget was that?
The producers never like to admit, but we were under 6 figures.
So that was low budget. Now, The Dog Walker, that's also a low budget independent film.
Yeah, spent a little bit more money on that, but not much more.
And you wrote it, directed it?
I wrote it and directed it. I wrote and directed Flesh Suitcase as well with a co-writer on Flesh Suitcase.
Did you?
Yeah.
So let's talk about The Dog Walker.
Okay.
Tell me, where did you film it? Because if you had a very low budget, and I think it only took you less than a month to
3 weeks.
3 weeks?
3 weeks, 18 days, 6-day weeks.
Wow.
Well, the whole idea of The Dog Walker came about after I'd had a film project that fell apart about 10 years ago. And that was a kind of a big budget film. It was like a $3 million movie. And it fell apart with like a week before shooting. I was pretty dejected. So I had all this time on my hand, and I had 2 dogs, 2 terriers, a Scottish Terrier and a West Highland White. And I used to walk them all the time through the neighborhood, sort of lamenting, my fate. And I'd go, what do I even know about? All I know about is walking these damn dogs. And
just like that?
Eureka, there came The Dog Walker out of that.
That's so great.
And they basically...
Because it's like a sitcom, and it's like you could run it on TV. I'm sure every time he goes out, something else happens.
Right.
But you made a wonderful story around it. And
We're actually thinking
Will
about that.
was great. You're thinking about that?
Yes.
Your lead, Will Stewart, seemed like he was on the screen every minute.
He's on almost every minute of the film. There's one sequence where he isn't on, but it seems like he's there all the time.
And you directed it.
I directed it.
Did you have to direct him to, he's like a con artist, he's a sweet guy, he has
No, that's him.
emotions. He's a con artist, he's a sweet guy.
He brought all that to the table.
Because that character just has a seamy side, has a nice side.
Yeah, he's got to be, and that's what was really difficult about casting the lead, the character that Will plays, Jerry Cooper, because he's got to appeal to people at the same time as he's basically picking their pocket.
Exactly.
I mean, I describe him as sort of a modern-day, latter-day Tom Sawyer, in the sense that he can get people to do what he wants them to do against their will, and they'll thank him for it.
Right.
And that's, that's sort of
That's a tough one.
That's a tough one.
He has that kind of like cute little quality about him, I guess, that makes it. One of the things, I don't know how much of the story you want to tell, but he ends up dealing with a group of older people. Mm-hmm. Well, older in their 80s.
Well, that's one of the charms of the story for me, and it came out of the neighborhood, because that's the neighborhood I live in. It's a mixed neighborhood, old, young, black, white. And so I wanted to inject that into the story because because this is my LA, and it really was about my neighborhood. We shot it in the house that I envisioned it in. We shot it in the alleys and the streets and
All
the
in
backyard.
that one area?
All in my street. All in
Do you
my
have
street.
to get permits for all of that stuff?
We had like a permit for a couple of days, and then we just kept changing the date.
No, that's what I wondered, if you had to get if you have to get permits, even if you're shooting in your own house.
Well, because of parking.
Oh, because of
A little bit,
parking,
but we didn't have much of a footprint, and our neighbors were all very into it, and I put our neighbors into the film.
Oh, that was perfect.
Yeah, I mean, it was really a sort of a neighborhood project. Everybody got into it. Everybody, you know.
Were there any kind of funny things that happened?
Funny things that happened. I don't know if there's some. Yeah, there's always funny things that happen on a set. My greatest joy was working with John Randolph, but the first day that he came to the set, he had to wait about 4 or 5 hours before we shot, because that's just what happens in films. It's hurry up and wait. And so we didn't get to shooting his first scene until about 11 o'clock at night. And John is 82 years old, and he's very recognizable. He was in Serpico and Seconds and Prizzi's Honor, and all,
He's been in a lot of movies.
many things. People will recognize him. But when we got to his scenes, he had like one line, and he wasn't able to get the one line, and so we basically worked with him. We got through it, and I thought, wow, this is going to be tough, because John has these amazingly emotional scenes. Well, his daughter took me aside and said, look, John's used to being in bed at 9:30. Just shoot him a little earlier. And so we did that, and I got to say, John Randolph, just everybody fell in love with him. He is the consummate professional, and he's the heart and soul of that film. And
He's the what's his character?
Ike Noodleman.
He's Ike, who had the kind of
He
wig
came
kind of sideways.
he came into the audition, and it wasn't an audition, it was just a meeting. And he said to me, well, I think I can do this part because I think I got all the equipment you need. And he basically took off his toupee, took out his hearing aid, and took out his teeth, which are featured in a very key scene in the movie.
Had you written that in, or did that come to you?
No, that was written in the script.
In.
And he said, one thing I'm really excited about is smoking that marijuana in the movie. I said, well, we'll have tobacco for you for that. And he says, oh, that's too bad. But he...
Oh, that's too bad. He can do whatever he wants.
But he really enjoyed working with the young people, and the young people learned a lot from him. Tony Todd, and who's the character he interacts with the most, who is famous for being the Candyman in that series of movies. They really formed a real bond in the film.
You can see that. I think that's why the movie is so likable, because you can see that not only is it an ensemble cast, but everybody seems to care about everybody. And it's true, I guess.
I mean, that surprised me, because a lot of my approach to directing this particular film was casting well and getting out of their way and letting the characters be who they are. And I was surprised a lot during the filming. I wrote a specific script. I filmed that script, but the movie took on a complete life of its own.
Oh, isn't that something?
And you got to let it go where it needs to go.
Well, that's what happened today. This show is finished. It took its life. It came to the end.
We're done?
Thanks.
Wow.
Thanks, Paul.
Well,
Thanks
thank
for being
you.
with
It's been
us.
a real pleasure, and I hope you have me back again.
I will, and I'm glad you were here. Don't
Okay.
go away. We'll be back with Kim McCarty, who did all the art on our set today. We'll talk to her in a minute. Yes. Hi, I'm Joan Quinn, and I'm with artist Kim McCarty. You can see Kim's work on the set, and it looks fantastic. Kim is a native Angelino with a BFA from Art Center in Pasadena and a master's in fine art from UCLA. She's had solo exhibits, and she's been in group shows and leading galleries across America. It seems you went to two different kinds of art school, because Art Center is so different from UCLA.
No, it's true. Well, when I was a kid, younger, the only way my parents would pay for education is if I went to Art Center and studied illustration or design or whatever. But I always wanted to be a painter. I always, was always too stubborn, and I did illustration, and I tried to work at it, but truthfully, as soon as I would go around with my portfolio, people would say, you know, your work, I love your work, but I really want it up on the walls. I don't see it for, you know, publications.
Commercial
things. And so then I started to make some money doing commissioned portraits for people.
Is that how you started?
Yeah, that's how I started to do it. And then, you know, slowly found my way back into the university system and got my master's at UCLA.
But the master's program at UCLA is an exceptional program.
Fabulous.
And it stands head and shoulders above anything, I think, throughout the U.S. anyway. Who was teaching when you were there?
When I went there, it's like when UCLA really just started this whole thing of getting like the hip artists.
Right.
And they really all of a sudden realized, you know, LA has a group now of generations of artists who are fabulous. I mean, before there was, you know, nobody, and now all of a sudden LA became really established. And the artist I worked with was William Bryce, who's my chair, fabulous man. And Roger Herman, Alexis Smith.
Oh, they were all teaching at that time?
They were all teaching. I would TA with all of them. And Jeffrey Valance was there, and Chris Burden was there, and Charlie Ray.
Chris Burden is still there.
Yeah, he's still there.
And he's so exceptional. Because, you know, the thing about them is you work with them. You work with the artist.
You do. And they would say, you know, people like Chris would say, you know, painting is dead. I mean, then painting was basically in the 80s, you know, it was kind of a funny time to be a painter in Los Angeles. It was more about, well, LA's always been more about conceptual thought or whatever. And it's interesting that in the 90s with UCLA, painting came back.
Now there's a lot of painting.
Oh yeah,
there.
Completely.
I know it is a cycle, and I know Chris Burden would say that because he's so conceptual. But did that influence you? Did that influence your work?
It was hard. It was a fight to, you know, be a painter and to be a narrative, an emotional painter, which is, you know, where I came from. It was definitely. And my other problem was that I was pregnant in graduate school. You know, I had my first child, and you were not supposed to have, you know,
a family,
and not supposed to have a family, you know. And I kept trying to like hide my stomach. Like, you were in this macho environment, but
well, it was tough then because you had to really live up to the standard of your work more than being a part of it. Because now there are a lot of women in that program.
Oh yeah. And there were starting to be then, but then video was also becoming very popular too.
When you came out of the master's program, and you were most likely influenced by those artists that you just mentioned, how did you start your first series of work?
It was interesting. Fortunately, very soon after, I moved to New York. And I had a really tiny little studio there, and I started just to paint more and more of the men on the street of New York. And that's
men?
Yes.
You hadn't started women yet?
No, I was really, actually in graduate school, I was really into painting men. And I think it's because it's such the opposite of, you know, I think it's the reason why men always painted women is they want to understand the opposite sex.
We have, this is a picture.
Yes.
Was this one of the first ones then?
Yes. I did that in graduate school.
Oh, you did? This is your husband, Michael McCarty?
Yes. Well, it's actually not, it's kind of more like his father, but it is.
Oh, is it? Mm-hmm. But we don't see the face, so we can't tell. We just see that kind of mannerism of his.
Right.
And then when did you get into women's?
Actually, it kind of interestingly enough is that pretty much when our house burned down and we had a huge fire and everything was burnt, and I had to go through inventory and start to recreate everything that was lost.
Was your studio there?
My studio was there. It didn't burn, but it got trashed. Everything got trashed. And actually I kind of started working a little bit on women then too, but when everything had burned, I did a show called Helen, and it was recreating a life and what makes a life. And when I had to go through, you know, because when you lose everything for insurance purposes, you have to go through everything that you lost. And somehow these paintings of lipsticks and clothes and just simple things like toilet paper.
Lipsticks, let's show that. Let's show the lipsticks.
You know, it was everything that creates a life that we have in our everyday.
But didn't you feel, I felt this was the beginning. I mean, this to me were women paintings.
Well, they were, you know.
They were, yeah.
Yeah, but I wasn't conscious of that, and it really wasn't until after everything burned. And I kind of had gone through my whole series of men and trying to figure out, my father, everything else.
I'm going to hold up some of these women's pictures while you're talking, and then maybe you can just tell us what they actually depict.
Well, then that was kind of from this show, Helen, that I was doing. You never see the face, but you see.
I was just going to say no head, huh?
No, and actually a lot of business women have responded to this work, and
In what way?
Well, I think because it kind of shows a tough, stance of a woman, and very business, whatever. And I don't think, not many women have had those kind of images around them.
Were you concerned about women's issues so much, or just about expressing a woman's demeanor?
I think both. I think it's always been, to be an artist, to be a woman is tough, and I've always been interested in, my place in the world and woman's place in the world.
Did it kind of come out personal then?
I think it did. I think definitely it did.
Like you were working in the food business. Did that kind of make you think that I should be in a suit? And
yes. Definitely, and how we, and to kind of have this neutral look of a woman, and and how we have to be a certain way.
And then where did the work go from there?
Well, actually, then I had a show coming up that was Works on Paper at a gallery called Works on Paper.
That was one of the most beautiful shows. I have to show this because I thought that was so beautiful. It's all watercolors, though.
Yeah, it was all watercolors.
And the other work was not in watercolor.
No, it was all very thick, opaque paint. Because everybody always said to me, well, I always felt that you could never, as an artist, show watercolors, that they were too feminine. And at that point, I was so kind of caught up just in my own head about what's masculine. And to be a real painter, it has to be kind of thick, and you don't show the transparency of watercolor.
So then you did those watercolors.
And I was always so very much interested in film, and it kind of, those little images were kind of breaking up like film negatives.
That was so great. It was very effective.
Thank you.
And it does. It had a movement, and maybe that was the film movement that I saw. Were you influenced by food then at all?
Well, I've always loved food, but I've never been able to paint food. But
you didn't paint food, but
no.
I mean, do you think that there's some kind of something in that?
Oh God, I don't think so. I think probably visually of looking at people, and people always came up in my paintings.
But when you go on these food sojourns, you'd be in Europe, so I'm sure that influenced the trips. It must have influenced your work.
Absolutely, and what you see and everything, and just the the experience. And I mean, there were years when all I did were paint people painting. I would paint people around tables eating. And
well, so that's the food influence, I think.
It was
that
definitely,
is.
And I think it was also a time of the '80s where it was kind of a very vivacious time. I mean, it was young, it was fun, it was.
What medium do you prefer?
It really depends. I mean, lately I've been really going back and doing more watercolors and more, because I'm kind of interested in the loss of youth now.
Oh, that's so we have youth.
Yeah, so I think I've kind of gone from men to women to now, children's maybe saying goodbye to my past and having watching my own children grow up. And actually, I'm in a show.
These are kind of sad.
Yeah, they're kind of haunting. I think it's a very fragile time, and it's a very vulnerable time, and I think a lot of artists from the baby boom generation are painting a lot of children, because I think that we never thought we were going to grow up
and
or
so
something.
You think you're looking at, not at your own children, but at lost youth? Is that how you feel?
I think a combination, and that it is, and somehow the...
and these are in watercolor, though,
they
again?
are large watercolors, and these will be in a show in January that I have here in Los Angeles. And
what medium is this?
This is oil on linen, and raw linen, and this is all a series that I have at a show right now in Columbus, Ohio.
So you've got 2 shows going at the same time, and people.
People.
It's
what I love, is people.
One of the things that I really thought was great was that you teach at Nancy Gosley Powers' studio. She's a landscape architect.
Right around the corner.
And who do you teach? Architects?
Mostly architects, and they're great architects. Fred Fisher, Steve Ehrlich, Denise.
Come to your class?
Yeah, they all come to the class, and it's like a forum.
And what do you do?
They all do watercolors, and they're all extremely talented. And
I think that's so great.
you know, and I think they get together because they love to communicate with each other, and they're all, you know, and I think it's like whenever you're an artist, you're a creative person, you don't have a chance to really do what you love to do. You're the business. You're doing all the other things.
But they're not learning watercolors to be a part of their work, are they? Or is
yes,
it? Oh, it
absolutely.
is.
I think sometimes too. I think Fred definitely he, you know, incorporates his watercolors that he does of buildings and everything for his
presentations.
For his presentations, absolutely. And I'm going to be giving them a show in January. And they are, you know, they're all very, very talented, and they
that's
show
so
up.
Great. And so you curate shows. You have shows in Michael's restaurant,
Yes.
which is in Santa Monica and New York.
Yes.
And Michael, as we said, was your husband.
Right.
And he's the chef owner of that. Did you ever work in the kitchen with him?
I have made chocolate souffles. Oh God, in the early days when I was 19 and 20, I mean, I would mix that chocolate souffle, and yes, I have done everything.
Let's put it in the oven, and we'll have it next time you come on.
I have been a bartender. I have been a co-check room. We've had not a co-check room. I mean, you know, when you're young and naive, you do it all.
Well, you're doing it great. I'm so glad you came on today, Kim.
Thank you, Joan.
Thank you. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time on the Joan Quinn Profiles. Keep writing to 777 South Figueroa, 44th floor, 900-17. See you then. Bye. That was so good.